Well, hey, friends, welcome to TAP, which stands for Theology Automatic for the People, and we are pressing on in our Gospel in the Margin series. So, thanks for letting me take the week off last week. I've had just a really busy schedule with getting to speak at conferences, and then this morning I got the distinct privilege of getting to lead some St. Juders in some wedding vows and into officiating their wedding. So, anyways, it's been a good couple of weeks, but a busy couple of weeks, and so I'm excited to be back at it. And so we're going to be looking at the woman at the well, which is in John 4, and I'm also going to preach on it tomorrow. So it's kind of killing two birds with one stone type thing. So as always, we begin every time with worship. And so as I was preparing this, it was 1 year from when life shut down, when COVID began, or I don't know, however we want to say it, when life as we knew it pivoted. And so, one, how are you doing? And I'm not asking you so that you'll answer me. I'm asking you so that you'll ask yourself this question and maybe take your pulse and take a little bit of life inventory and just, how are you? How are you doing? And then take some time to just reflect on what has God taught you this year? What have you learned about the Lord? What have you learned about yourself, the world, whatever things God has taught you? And then since it is 1 year, I think we're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, right? I know more people are now vaccinated, and thank goodness that teachers and childcare workers are now considered 1A or 1B or whatever that means. I'm hearing that by the summer, the city health officials in Dallas are expecting us to be at what they call herd immunity, which means 80% of Dallas will either have had COVID and will have antibodies or will have received the vaccine. And so it's not to say life will be completely normal, but it feels like to me spring is here in more than one way. And so what are you hoping for as you what are the things that you hope return? What are the things maybe that you're glad are gone and you hope those never come back? But yeah, so how are you doing? What has God taught you this year, and what are you hoping for? And I might ask y'all this on Tuesday, and we'll share a little bit of this with each other. So, okay, so the woman at the well, she doesn't have a name, which is interesting because typically people in the stories remember naming matters. And so it's interesting that we don't have her name. But we have so the book of John, all about the ministry, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, a lot of his stories. I love John. I love that we're going through it as a church on Sundays. It's one of my favorite books in the New Testament. And so he has been in Jerusalem. He has had, if you remember John 1, big, like in the beginning was the Word and the Word was with God. And it's like a retelling of Genesis 1 is John 1. John 2, the wedding at Cana. John 3, you have Nicodemus and all that happening. John 4 is Jesus is going to leave Jerusalem and go to Galilee. And Galilee is where he's from. It's a home base of sorts. And so, but in the text it says that he has to go through Samaria, which is really interesting. And so he goes through Samaria. He stops at a well. Very important place in the history of Israel. And there's a woman there who we are told is Samaritan more than once. And they have a convo. And in the process of that conversation, she learns that Jesus is the Messiah, and a Messiah she has been waiting for, which is interesting. And then she goes and evangelizes her town. The people of Samaria tell Jesus, or ask Jesus, you don't tell Jesus anything, but ask Jesus, will he stay for a couple of days? And he does. He obliges them, which is really incredible. And then a lot of the town is saved. And then the story ends, and Jesus goes to Galilee. So really incredible story. So much we can mine out of this, so much. And I meant to show you guys, my good friend Kat wrote a book. It's her second book. It's called The In-Between Place. And in that book, she tells a lot about her story, her personal story. She tells stories about her friends. And then she also uses this story, and she calls Jesus Going to Samaria the In-Between Place. And she does a deep dive into this text. And so it's a good book. It's a great read. So anyways, I'll show it to you guys on Tuesday. I must have left it out in the living room. Okay, so just to give you some background information. This woman, it's kind of, do y'all remember like when we were reading about the Ethiopian eunuch, and he's a eunuch, and by the way, he's a eunuch, and we haven't told you already, he's a eunuch. So it's a little bit of that with the fact that she's Samaritan. And the reason why is there is tension in the text when Jesus is coming through Samaria. Samaritans and Jews do not get along. And so the Samaritans were a group of people who lived in Samaria, which is an area north of Jerusalem. So if you think of Israel like as a rectangle. It's not, but more or less, we'll just say it's a rectangle. In the bottom is where the tribe of Judah was given land. That tribe had the capital, Jerusalem. And this is where God tells them to build the temple and to have the sacrificial system. That country, so the bottom rectangle and then the rest of the top rectangle, split off after David has Solomon. Under Solomon, it's a united kingdom. And then Solomon's kids, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, they split it. Okay? Not good. Not good. In the north is the 10 tribes in the north. And then you got the tribe of Judah in the south. In the north, the Assyrians come in and take them out. Okay? The way that they took them out was the Assyrians took a lot of the people from Israel out of the land, but then they also allowed Assyrians to come into the land, and then they intermingled and they intermarried with the Jewish people. The northern tribe of Israel intermarried with the Assyrians. Out of those marriages became folks who were half Jewish and half Gentile, and those half Jew, half Gentile people became known as the Samaritans. So they're not fully Gentile. They have some ethnic ties to the to the Jewish people, but they're not fully Jewish either. And so they have some religious ties, they have some ethnic ties, but they're really their own category. They're not fully Gentile, they're not fully Jewish, okay? So that's how they were created. They had their own unique copy of the first 5 books of the Bible. So there's a lot of overlap, but they also had some different views on some major teachings of the Old Testament. One of which was they really believed that Moses was the Messiah and that he was given special things happened with Moses in Mount Gerizim, which is a mountain in the northern kingdom, which you can understand why they would prefer that. And so they believed on that mountain in Mount Gerizim in their land is where the true worship should take place, whereas the southern kingdom is like, no, it's in Jerusalem, and Moses isn't the Messiah. And so there's this tension. I mean, it's tension. It's just another way of saying it. So Jews and Samaritans do not get along. And in fact, they despise each other, especially the more religious Jewish people. They are told, don't intermarry with the Gentiles. So to them, it's just an abomination. And then, as if that weren't bad enough, because that happens throughout their history, my goodness. I mean, hello, Rahab, Ruth, all these people like that. If that's your only thing that you've done, but they've taken the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, that is like, absolutely it's like if somebody was like, I have a Bible, we have a Bible, but like their Bible's not our Bible, we'd be like, not really. And so and if they were like, we don't worship Jesus, we worship Jeremy, and we'd be like, that doesn't count. And so the fact that they're like, we have a Messiah, it's Moses, and we have our own Torah, you can imagine, and there's tension. Okay, so other reasons why there'd be tension. The Jews, and this is all stuff that I stole from gotquestions.org, which is sometimes like hit or miss. So I'm not in a full sell endorsing gotquestions.org, but if ever you have a question about the Bible and you're like, I don't know, and it's a super random question, go to gotquestions.org and look it up, because sometimes it's just like fantastic. So anyways, the Jews, after their return from Babylon, began rebuilding their temple. And so if you remember, the northern kingdom is carried off in 722. The southern kingdom in 586, they're carried off by Assyria. The southern kingdom is carried off by Babylon. So go back to our rectangle, the top part of our rectangle, 722 Assyrians. The bottom part of our rectangle, Babylon, 586. Okay. The Babylonians are then taken over by the Medes and Persians. The Medes and the Persians have a more like a kinder view of the conquered people. And so they allow them to return and begin to rebuild. Okay. So when they begin rebuilding there's like Zerubbabel and Ezra and Nehemiah, these are the people like Ezra and Nehemiah. Those are the books where they're rebuilding. So if you want to read about it, go read those books. While Nehemiah is engaged in building the walls of Jerusalem, this is so bad, the Samaritans vigorously attempted to halt the undertaking. Okay, so again, you can imagine, they already don't like each other because they're intermarried. And then a couple hundred years later, when the Jewish people are returning to their homeland in the land that they believe is the really right homeland, which is in Jerusalem, and they're rebuilding the temple, the Samaritans are like, no, tension. We're feeling tension. Okay, then the Samaritans built a temple for themselves on Mount Gerizim, you heard me reference, which the Samaritans insisted was designated by Moses as the place where the nation should worship. Not true. Okay, so they're wrong, right? But they build their own temple there. And then they invoke Moses, who is like the Jewish, like Moses. And they're like, Moses said this was true. So you can imagine tension. And Sanballat, the leader of the Samaritans, established his son-in-law Manasseh as a high priest. And the idolatrous religion of the Samaritans thus began perpetuated. So like they had their own false religious worship that smelled like Judaism, but wasn't. Okay, so that creates tension. Okay, my cat just jumped up on this bed. He better behave. We're not having a redo. And then Samaria became a place of refuge for all the outlaws of Judea. You see this in Joshua and all that. And the Samaritans willingly received Jewish criminals and refugees from justice. The violators of the Jewish laws and those who had been excommunicated found safety for themselves in Samaria, greatly increasing the hatred. So, like, as if we didn't hate each other enough, then when like Jewish people were like, oh yeah, I stole my cousin's donkey and like slapped his daughter and the law is coming for me, and so now I've run away to Samaria, and Samaritans are like, fine with us. Like, again, tension. And then the Samaritans received only the 5 books of Moses and rejected the writings of the prophets and all the Jewish traditions. So again, they're kind of Jewish, but they're also kind of Gentile, and they're just doing their own thing. So again, there is, and you're going to see this religious tension in the text. It's when we get to the John 4 that you're going to be like, oh, that's why that chickadee, the woman at the well, is asking those questions, because they're very specific questions. And if you didn't know this background, you might be going, those are very strange questions. But when we get to John 4, you're going to be like, oh, that's why she's asking those questions. Okay, more background info. Shechem. The place where this conversation is happening, it says that it was in the city of Sychar in the region of Samaria. This is most likely the same place as Old Testament Shechem, okay? Shechem is named after the man Shechem, okay? And so there was, when Jacob and his sons and his daughters are living in this area, a man named Shechem rapes Dinah, Jacob's daughter. And if you remember that story from Genesis 34, Jacob really does nothing about it. And his sons decide to take matters into their own hands, and they convince all the Shechemites, Shechem and his family, to get circumcised, because they're like, because Shechem then wants to marry Dinah. And I mean, atrocious, awful, awful, awful. You raped this woman, and then you're like, I want her for myself. And he tells his dad, go get her for me. And Jacob is a deadbeat dad doing nothing to avenge his daughter, which he has every right to do. He should have been pursuing justice on behalf of his daughter Dinah, and he doesn't. And so his sons are angry. They're angry with him, and they're angry with Shechem. So they say, hey, why don't you circumcise yourselves, and then we can enter into a covenant together. And they did that to weaken the Shechemites. And after they circumcise themselves, which you can imagine, it's a tender removal for grown men, so they're in pain. And it's when that they're recovering from that Dinah's brothers, the sons of Jacob, attack and murder these men. Not the kind of justice God would mete out, okay? So you don't take the sign of the covenant, which is circumcision, and then abuse that. But at the same time, their dad is not setting a good example. And so it is awful, 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 okay? This same place is where God is an altar to God is created by Abraham. This same place, y'all, this is where Jacob later is gonna bury some idols to hide them. Like, he shouldn't have idols. He is, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Like, he is a forefather of our faith. People say, oh, we believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Like, Jacob should not have idols of anything. And so he goes to hide them. So same place that Jacob's sons, again, they're butt heads until much later in the story. They sell their brother into slavery in this place. In Judges 9, this is a crazy story where Abimelech, he is an evil, evil dude. And he has 70 brothers and he kills them all. This is crazy. So Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem, to his mother's relatives, and said to them and the whole clan of his mother's family, say in all the ears of the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal rule over you, or that one rule over you? First of all, those aren't mutually exclusive things, okay? Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh. So he's like, and his mother's relatives spoke all these words on his behalf in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our brother. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal Berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows. lovely story, who followed him. And he went to his father's house at Orpah and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone. Okay. And then, all right, so this land of Shechem, where this story is taking place, the woman at the well story is taking place. First of all, Jews hate Samaritans. Second of all, this land is awful. The only positive thing here is that God has an altar made by Abraham, like early in the Genesis story. Okay, see, this is what we're not going to do. We're not going to do this today. Excuse us. Say goodbye to our friends. Say bye. Say bye-bye. We're going to go in the bathroom, and we're going to play in the bathroom. I know. I'm very disappointing weather today, aren't I? There you go. Kids. Okay. This land is the only positive thing that's really happened on this land is Abraham, when God comes to Abraham and he says, blah, 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 you're going to be my people. Bless those who bless you will be blessed. Those who curse you will be cursed. And so Abraham builds an altar to God there. That's the only positive thing that really happens in this land. And the negatives are, they're so negative. I mean, there is a rape, which is horrifying. And there is a murder of your brothers so that you can be the leader over them. There is human trafficking that takes place here. There is idolatry and then hiding your idolatry. And then, as if things can't get worse, remember, our rectangle land is supposed to be one country, one country, okay? And then the sons of Solomon are like, nah. And they break it in half, which is never supposed to happen. And Rehoboam becomes king of the north, and Jeroboam becomes king in the south. Rehoboam is coronated at Shechem. So nothing good happens in this land, okay? So when we're reading our Bible and we're reading along in John 4, and then all of a sudden we're just like, yeah, and then Jesus had to go through Samaria, and he comes to the city of Sychar, which is in the thing of Samaria. And if we know our history and we're like, Sychar, that's near Shechem. Shechem, Jesus is in Shechem? Nothing good happens in Shechem is what we should be thinking, okay? And nothing good happens with Samaritans and Jews. More background info. There's so much background info in this story, which is why it's like, chef's kiss. Okay. I should have put, well, what do we have here? Okay. Wells are very important parts in history in the Bible because it is a place where, first of all, women go to the well. They are the ones that water animals and all that stuff. And, Isaac, so Abraham and Sarah need to find a wife for Isaac, so they send their servant, and he is like, okay, I'm going to go to this well, and the first woman that comes out to serve me is going to be the wife, and so Rebecca comes out, so Rebecca finds her husband at a well. Then Jacob goes to a well, and he waters all the livestock for Rachel, and then he barters for Rachel and ends up in bed with Leah, but anyways, he finds his wife at a well, takes him a long, wonky path to it. Moses eventually finds his wife, Zipporah, at a well. So, when you see, okay, so we have Jew-Samaritan, tension. Shechem, tension. And we're at a well. Tension. There is nothing but tension in this text when this story is unfolding, okay? All right, more information. I actually wrote a paper on this in seminary about how radical this incident really is with Jesus. And so the M in front of here it stands for the Mishnah. And so in the Mishnah it says, this is what Jewish people taught. Okay, and this isn't exactly the time of Jesus, but it gives you an idea of just how ridiculously racist it is. They say the daughters of Samaritans are menstruants from their cradle, which menstruance is when you're on your period. And if you're on your period, according to Jewish law, you're unclean. And this is what the Jews are saying about Samaritan women, is that from the cradle, they're always unclean. They're always on their period, which isn't it's hyperbolic, but their point is all Samaritan women are unclean. Okay, that's rude and racist. In Maccabees, it says women, particularly unmarried women, should not go out in public in general, but stay inside the house. So women are not unaccompanied in public in the ancient world, and honestly in parts of today that have in a lot of Eastern parts of today. But during Jesus' time, this was a teaching. The Maccabees is a book that was written between the Old Testament and the New, and unmarried women, they have to have a male advocate, to be like going out and going places. More Mishnah said a woman speaking with a man in the market was sexually suspicious. So you guys get the gist. Like, there is tension. I could keep going. There are so many texts about how men and women don't talk. There are so many texts about why would you even bother to teach the woman the law, because it's a waste of time. Rude. But you get the idea. Jews and Samaritans shouldn't get along. Men and women shouldn't get along, shouldn't talk to each other, shouldn't be talking to each other in places like wells where there's potential sexual tension. And so when you have a Jewish single man and a Samaritan unaccompanied woman, and you're reading this story in the first century, like if you know all this background info and you're reading this story, you're asking yourself, can anything good come of this? Because this doesn't look good. This doesn't feel right. If he's not Jesus, he could take advantage of her. If he's not Jesus, she can seduce and harm him. If he's not Jesus, she's unclean. So why would you, and like there are other writings that say that you would never share the vessel with an unclean person, like a drinking vessel. And he asks her for a drink. Okay, here's all the background info. Now let's jump into the story. Jesus is, like I said, he had been in Jerusalem. He's hanging out with Nicodemus. He tells Nicodemus, you got to be born again. And then John the Baptist exalts Christ, all that stuff. And then it says in the text that he had to go through Samaria. It's a very interesting phrase there, because the other times that phrase is used, it's of like really important moments in John. Like he had to go the cross type thing. So it's an interesting thing that the story is telling us, like, hey, something special is happening here. Jesus shows up at the well, and it says it's in the 6th hour, which is the middle of the day, and it's probably hot, and he's parched. And so he's hungry and parched. And so his disciples have left him. So Jesus is all alone at the well. And lo and behold, here comes a Samaritan woman. And she comes out with her vessel. And again, at this point, if we're reading this and we're in the 1st century, we are feeling tension. Like, we're going, how's this going to play out? Like, this is, interesting. Jesus, not one to concern himself with the thought of these ridiculous things. Like, he doesn't think this woman is a menstruant. He doesn't think she's unclean. He doesn't think any of these things, because he's perfect and wonderful and good. And he just says to her, hey, can you give me a drink? And which is really interesting. So I'm going to read some of the text as you go along, because I want you to pick it up. Her response. Okay, so Jesus, he's omniscient. He has all knowledge. He is not unaware of the background information that I have just given you. It's just he doesn't care. She is perfectly aware of the background information based on her response. So he says, a woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me a drink. For his disciples had gone away in the city to buy food. I said that really aggressively. Like, I doubt he was like, give me a drink. But anyways, the Samaritan woman. So again, how many times are we going to hear that she's Samaritan? So a woman from Samaria. And this is we've already been told twice that he's going through Samaria. Then a woman from Samaria comes out, and he says, and then Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, so she's picking up on all the background information. She's like, how is it a Jew, where am I at, would ask me for a drink since I'm a woman from Samaria? So she is picking up on the like, hey, are you confused? Like, are you confused about the way that this works? Jews and Gentiles do not have dealings with each other. And then John tells us that. He literally puts in parentheses, for Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Again, the 5th time we've been told this woman's from Samaria. And Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that's saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you the living water. And she's like, okay. She's not picking up what he's putting down yet. Okay, so here's a Samaritan woman. The text goes great lengths to tell us she's a Samaritan woman. Jesus says to her, give me a drink. And she knows this isn't appropriate. This is socially outside the box. And she's like, how can you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink? And Jesus, being Jesus, gives this like enigmatic response. And he's like, if you knew who was speaking to you and you knew what he had, you would be asking him for a drink of what he's got. And she's like, But she doesn't walk away. Like, she doesn't walk away from this conversation with Jesus. She engages him. She continues on. Like, she could have just been like, bro, you are insane. And this is not okay for us to be talking to each other. So I'm just going to walk away. But instead she's like, okay, let's just say that I'm going to go with you here. And she says, sir, you have nothing to draw water with. And this well is pretty deep. So where do you get the living water? And then she asks, are you greater than our father Jacob? Which is such a good question. And she says, he gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and livestock. And so here's this woman. Jesus gives some enigmatic response, like, if you knew what I had, you'd be asking me for water. And she's like, yeah, here's the deal. You don't have a bucket, and this is a deep well? And do you really think what you have to offer me is better than our father Jacob? So this woman is answering him in a religious response. Like, she's asking him, like, how can you give me something? And do you honestly think that you are greater than Jacob? Which, yeah. Okay, so check the parallels here. Nicodemus and this woman are meant to be parallel. Nicodemus, religious leader. He's an insider. He comes at night. And John is always making plays on night and day, darkness and lightness and all this stuff. So Nicodemus comes at night. He has same questions for Jesus. And Jesus says to him, hey, listen, nobody who's not born again cannot be saved. And he's like, huh? Which is really what she's doing too. But the difference is she keeps pressing. She doesn't give up on the conversation. So she's like, do you really think that you're better than Jacob? And so we're seeing the same parallel track playing out. Nicodemus has follow-up questions for Jesus. This woman has follow-up questions for Jesus. Jesus is enigmatic each time. Like, it's Jesus being Jesus, where he reveals but not all the way, and reveals and not all the way. And Nicodemus really walks away going, I don't know. Now, later on in the book of John, we see that Nicodemus does understand, and praise God for that. But this woman hangs in there, and she keeps pressing. And so she asks him, do you really think you're better than Jacob? First of all, it's not hard to be better than Jacob. But yes! Okay, so going back, Shechem. This place in Shechem. Here is Jacob, whose daughter is sexually assaulted in the same place that Jesus and this woman are sitting. And Jacob does nothing. Here's Jesus sitting with a Samaritan woman who his own brothers, Jesus's like Jewish men, would consider this woman unclean. They're sitting at a well. There is sexual tension in this story if they want there to be sexual tension, and Jesus is not that kind of guy. So when asking the question, are you better than Jacob who gave us this well? The answer is a resounding, unequivocal, are you kidding me? So much better. Everything that Jacob gave you is nothing compared to what I can give you. Jacob gave you this lousy, measly well, and I can give you eternal life. The well that springs up from inside of you and makes you never thirst again. Am I better than Jacob? Jacob can't even untie my sandal. Am I better than Jacob? I would never let my daughter be sexually assaulted and do nothing about that. And in fact, you are my daughter, and I'm about to address the harm that's been done to you. And so, yes, in every way, I'm better than Jacob. In every way. Jesus tells her, he goes on with it, and he's like, yeah. He says, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. Am I better than Jacob? Jacob's water keeps you thirsty. You got to keep coming back for more. And he says, the water that I will give him will become in a spring of water, and he will burn up all. And she says, sir, give me this water. She doesn't fully understand. So just like Nicodemus doesn't fully understand, but Nicodemus walks away scratching his head. This woman goes, okay, give it to me then. Give me this water, or have, and so that I'll be thirsty and I won't have to come draw this water. She doesn't fully understand yet, but she is still hanging with Jesus, hanging in this conversation. She doesn't fully get it, but she's like, great, give me this water then. You say you can give me the water that is better than Jacob's water. Give me that water. And then the convo goes even deeper, which I love. Jesus just like, and so then he says to her, okay, hey, go bring your husband here. And she's like, I don't have a husband. And Jesus says to her, you were right. You've had 5 husbands, and the man that you're living with now is not your husband. Okay, we have to push pause here. There are plenty of scholars who assume that the reason why this woman has gone through 5 husbands is because of her infidelity, and these husbands have divorced her, and now she's just sleeping with some random man. Here's the thing. Nobody in their right mind would marry a woman who's a serial adulterer in the ancient world. Because first of all, when women first get married, in your first marriage, you have a dowry, which is a financial gift that your family will give to your husband so that he can use that for financial wealth. If you are divorced for infidelity, you do not get your dowry back. So her next husband would receive no financial incentive for marrying her. Okay. So maybe you might convince 2 guys to marry you, but if you're a serial adulterer, that's not going to happen. Secondly, women don't have the right to ask for divorce in the ancient world. They need a male advocate to do this for them, okay? Women are often thrown apart. So there are other scholars who say most likely what's happening here is not that she's a serial adulterer. It's either that she's been tossed away multiple times, or more likely, she's probably a multi-time widow. Now, here's the thing. If she's a widow 5 times over, the ancient world would still think of her as suspicious. They'd be wondering, what's wrong with you that all your husbands die? So we tend to tell this story in a way that she's morally suspicious because Jesus says, and the man you're living with now is not your husband. Well, we've talked about this in other classes and things like that. In the ancient world, if you were to marry somebody, they legally, their family and that person becomes your legal responsibility. And if you've got another wife and you've got other children, that you may not want to take on another wife. It's like we saw this in the Boaz Ruth story, right? Where the kinsman redeemer comes out, the such and such guy, and he's like, hey, do you want the property of Elimelech? And he was like, yeah. And he was like, okay, it comes with a woman. And he's like, never mind. Okay. And so chances are this man that she's living with, he may have another wife and she's more like a concubine. Now, that's wrong. Okay. But what are her options? It goes back to over and over again. And so there are a lot of scholars who are re-looking at this story saying maybe it's not that she is a adulterous woman who just can't stop cheating, because she's not going to get married. There's no way 5 men are going to take her on in the ancient world. It just doesn't happen. More likely, she is the victim of being a widow or being tossed aside by men, and that the best station she can bring in life now is to be living with a man who maybe has another wife or another family situation where he has not legally married her, but that is, for all intents and purposes, his husband. So it changes how we color this woman. Part of why scholars think, gosh, she's not a woman of ill repute, is because later in the story, she's going to go around the town and tell everybody about Jesus. And if she's a woman of ill repute, nobody's going to listen to her. But everyone listens to her. And so it's a really interesting thing that's happening here. So here's what I'd say. If she is a woman of ill repute because she just keeps having affairs, Jesus is kind and gentle and straightforward and crosses boundaries to be with her. If she's the victim of widowhood or being abandoned by these men, Jesus is gentle and crosses boundaries with her, right? And either way, we see a gentle Jesus not being a guy who comes and exploits this woman, not being a guy who takes advantage of the fact that he's alone with a woman, not being the kind of guy who says, I don't talk to women. Not being the kind of guy who says, oh, you're an adulterer. And maybe she wasn't. But also not being a guy like, oh, you're a widow. Like, you have nothing good to offer the world. Like, you are a burden. Like, regardless of how she got in this situation, kind and gentle Jesus is pushing into her. So she asks for this water that can never go away. And he's like, yeah, bring me your husband. And she's like, yeah, I don't have a husband. And so Jesus says to her, you're right in saying I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true. And she responds, not in shame. And she's like, wow, you must be a prophet. So her response to him is, again, continual engagement with Jesus. She continues to engage. And so she's going, wait a minute. You know about my 5 previous husbands, and you know about my current living arrangement. You must be a prophet. Like, you must have like some sort of knowledge from above. And rather than running from that and being scared of that or dismissing that or whatever, she then takes the opportunity to ask him a religious question. She's like, oh, since you're a prophet, I've always wondered about some things. May I bother you for a theological question? Which I just love. I love this woman. I just love this woman. I'm like, somebody's like, oh, you're a rabbi? I have some questions for you. I'm so glad you're here. Oh, you're a prophet? I would like to clear up some things about where we worship the Messiah, right? So here's this woman. Jesus says to her, you're right. You are right to say you don't have a husband. You've had 5 husbands, and the man you live with now is not your husband. And she says, sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers, talking about the Samaritans, worship on this mountain, but you say in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. Okay, so now going back to our understanding of Samaritans, they believe Mount Gerizim is the place that you're supposed to worship. The Jews believe Jerusalem is the place you're going to worship. Jesus has just confronted this woman. Well, not confronted her, but he's just been like, hey, I know about your life. And she's like, you're a prophet? Could you settle this massive debate for me between Jews and Samaritans? And she says, okay, you blah, blah, blah. And she says, Jesus, so she basically asks the question, like, we say we worship on Gerizim. You say you worship on Jerusalem. And Jesus says to her, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father, which is interesting. Jesus supersedes both the Samaritan and the Jewish debate. He goes, wait, there's a time coming where none of this is going to matter because you're going to worship the Father in spirit and in truth, not on a mountain. It's so cool. And he says, you worship what you do not know, but we worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Why? Because he's Jewish. Jesus is Jewish. Salvation is from the Jews. It's amazing. But the hour is coming and is now here. The hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. And the woman said to him, okay, all right, so here's Jesus. She's like, hey, I can't help but notice you're a prophet because you know all these things about my life. Could you answer this massive Samaritan Jewish debate? And he goes, listen, this debate, it's pretty much meaningless because a time is coming, and it's here now, when you will, because God is spirit, you will worship in spirit and in truth. And she's like, okay. Then she continues. She continues with this religious conversation. I love this woman. She says, I know that the Messiah is coming. I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called the Christ. And when he comes, he will tell us all things. And he says to her, Jesus says to her, I who speak to you am he. It's so good, y'all. This is like, I just love this story. Here's this woman. There is tension. Nothing good happens in this place. Jews and Samaritans don't get along. Men and women have nothing to do with each other. She is at a well, a place where there is tension. She's unmarried, mind you. Jesus is unmarried. Is this like a type situation? What is this? What is happening here? Tension, tension, tension. Jesus comes and he's like, give me some water. And she's like, yeah, are you like somehow unaware of the fact that you're a Jewish man and I'm a Samaritan woman? And he's like, if you knew who I was, you'd be asking me for water. And she's like, really? Are you greater than Jacob? And he's like, yes. And then she says, go get your husband. And she's like, I don't have a husband. He's like, you're right. You don't have a husband, but I know your story. I know you. I know your story. And she goes, you're a prophet. Well, since you're a prophet, I have some religious questions for you. Should we be worshiping on Mount Gerizim or should we be worshiping in Jerusalem? And Jesus says, listen, your little petty debates, they're not going to matter soon because a time is coming when you will worship in spirit and in truth. And she's like, okay, well, I know that the Messiah is going to come and work all this out. And he's like, you bet, you bet. And I am he. Unbelievable moment. And then what happens? The disciples come back. Those goofy bunch of dudes, they come back. And they marvel at the fact that Jesus is talking with a woman, but no one says anything. They don't ask her, what do you seek? Or why are you talking with her? They don't do anything. It's just like, it's so strange. It's like we're watching, like if the filmmaker is making this movie, it's like this really intense scene between this man and woman who should not be talking to each other. A Jew, a Samaritan, God-man, a human. Like they should not be talking to each other. And then bloop, 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 here come the disciples and they're like, and they say nothing. And what does she do? She believes. You know why? Because she runs into town. And they come back and she runs into town. And she goes out and she says, hey, come see a man who told me all that I'd ever done. He might be the Messiah, guys. Now remember, she thinks Moses is the Messiah. So this is a radical pivot for her. And the disciples are urging him. And so then, she goes into town and says, come out and meet this guy. And the disciples are like, you need to eat something. Rabbi, eat. And he says to them, I have food to eat that you do not know about. And the disciples said to one another, has anyone brought him something to eat? Like, did y'all feed him? Like, I didn't give him anything. Did you give him the Jimmy Johns? I didn't give him the Jimmy Johns. And then Jesus says to them, listen, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his good work. Do you not say these are yet 4 months? Then comes the harvest, yada, yada, yada. Jesus being Jesus, still speaking enigmatically. Nicodemus didn't get it. The disciples don't get it. And this woman, he's like, I'm the eternal water I'm the water that springs up in eternal life. And she's like, okay. And every other time we're seeing the Jewish people interact with Jesus and they're like, you already have food? And he's like, no, my food is to do the will of the Father. And they're sowing and reaping and laboring and all this stuff. And they're just like, these poor disciples, they just don't get it. Many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. That's so good. And he told me all that I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 more days, and many more believed because of his word. They said to the woman, it is no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that it is indeed the Savior of the world. What a cool story, right? Here's this woman. Tension, 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 tension. She has a religious conversation with Jesus. He tells her, I am the Messiah, which is just bonkers. And she's like, okay. And she has this massive pivot. She goes back into her town. She tells the people of her town, come out and listen to this guy. They come out and they believe, like, because of her word of her testimony, they come out and then they hear Jesus, and then the Samaritans believe. The Samaritans believe. The Samaritans believe. The outsider Samaritans believe, unlike the Jews. Right? It's going back to our insider outsider. The Jews are supposed to believe. The Jews are. And we're going to get to chapter 5. And the Jews are going to come to him and be like, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, hey, you search the scriptures because in them you think you have eternal life. But I'm telling you all the scriptures point to me. And they're like, let's kill him. So our insider outsider, like, the Jews hate the Samaritans. They hate the Samaritans. Jesus goes to Samaria. He talks to a woman he has no business talking to. She believes that he has the power to have eternal life because he is in fact the Messiah, not Moses. He is the Messiah, and she will worship him in spirit and truth. And she goes out and tells her townsfolk, and those townsfolk come, and guess who becomes insiders? The outside Samaritan. It's bonkers what's happening in this story. It's an unbelievable story. The Samaritans believe unlike the outsiders. Okay, so what's our big so what? There is continuity between the Old Testament and the New Testament. We already saw that in the Ethiopian eunuch in the Acts story, but this idea that God is taking the outsiders, Ruth, Rahab, Naaman, fill in the blank, and moving them to the inside is consistent when Jesus comes on the scene, which is what we should see. If Jesus is the visible representation of the invisible God, then we should continue to see this. It is shocking when you understand the background information that Samaritans would be a part of Jesus's ministry and that he would spend so much time in Samaria and that he would save them. Like, that is shocking. But not really if you've been following the pattern. Like, we should have known the outsiders were going to be made insiders, right? We see this with Nicodemus and the woman, not just the Samaritan people, but like now Nicodemus eventually comes to understand, which is really, really sweet. But I mean, there are these parallel tracks between the two. I mean, you can see this religious leader, male, comes at night, woman just coming to a well. She's like, we're not supposed to be talking to each other. And yet they both receive enigmatic teaching, like strange teaching from Jesus. And she leans into that. And then begins to trust and obey and all of that. Jesus crosses social, ethnic, gender, class boundaries, and I think he expects us to, right? I mean, I think that, there is so much tension in this text. And Jesus isn't that kind of guy, right? He talks to women. He values women. He's kind to her. He's not dismissive of her. He doesn't think she's unclean. He's willing to share his drinking vessel with her. Like, this woman was going to drink from the same vessel as God. And he doesn't think she's unclean, unlike his Jewish brethren of his day. And he doesn't have a libido that's unchecked, that thinks women are just pitfalls waiting to happen, sexual pitfalls, right? There's so many times that like I'm sure y'all have heard the Billy Graham rule, where it's like a man will never be alone with a woman because he doesn't want to end up making a mistake. Now, look, if you are the type of guy who needs those kind of boundaries because you know yourself and you have a history of impropriety, man, keep the boundaries, but not because I'm dangerous, not because I'm the problem. You're the problem. And if you know you need those boundaries, then by all means have boundaries. But the Billy Graham rule just says that women are just potential moments for screwing up, right? Like I'm a sexual temptation to you, as if I don't have my own agency, and as if I wouldn't just say, no, get away from me, right? And so Jesus doesn't have a Billy Graham rule. He has a Jesus rule, which is he engages this woman. And then he can see her for what she is, which is an image bearer of God, that she's gonna believe, that she's gonna ask him for the eternal life water. I mean, yeah, I'm not saying don't have boundaries. That's crazy. That's bonkers. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is don't view the opposite gender just as objects of sexual gratification. They are your brothers and your sisters. Treat them that way. We are the family of God. We should act like it. That phrase, Jesus had to go through Samaria, I think he did, because my favorite part in the story is when she says, are you better than Jacob? And it makes me want to laugh, because I'm like, the bar is so low to be better than Jacob. He gets on my nerves. Like he irks me. And I'm sure if my story were in the scriptures, I would irk people. So it's not to say that I think I'm somehow better than Jacob. That story of Dinah, it just always bothers me. It just bothers me. And so here's this land of Shechem. And can anything good happen there? And Jesus reminds us that he's in the business of redeeming not just people, but places, right? He's in every square inch of this world belongs to him. And evil tried to put their flag in Shechem, and he was like, no. All of this is mine. All of this. And I can redeem the evil that Shechem did. I can redeem the evil that Jacob did. I can redeem the evil that Rehoboam did. I can redeem the evil of Joseph's brothers. And we see the redemptions of Joseph's brothers. Sometimes we even see it play out in front of our eyes. And so, as a woman, I wouldn't want to spend too much time in Shechem prior to Jesus coming. And now as a woman, I want to go to Shechem and stand in the place where Jesus encountered this woman. Where Jesus reminded me that even though I'm a woman, I'm valuable to him. And though Jewish men may not talk to me, Jesus will. And I think that's a really powerful reminder to us that Jesus redeems so much. That this whole world is his. And he's declaring over all of it, mine. So can anything good come from Shechem? Yes. Can anything good come from your hometown? Yes. Can anything good come from your family? Yes. Can anything good come from your story? Yes. Yes, because Jesus is in the business of restoration. And then finally, Jesus is the living water. That's the point of the story. We're going to see it later. Jesus in John 7 is also going to go up to Jerusalem. And there's a really cool fountain area. And he's going to declare, I'm the water. I'm the living water again. But this is where he's declaring it here, that he can satisfy a thirst that no well could ever satisfy. And so I'd love for us on Tuesday to ask ourselves, what do we think this means? How would you describe Jesus to others? I would love for us to just spend some time on this. And then what boundaries are hard for you to cross, right? Are there groups of people? Are there times where you're just intimidated or scared or not pushing past? Like, where is it difficult to lean in and have conversations about the Lord? And so think about these questions, and then on Tuesday we'll dive in. And so if nobody's told you today they love you, I do, but way more importantly, the God of the universe who crosses all boundaries to get to us is crazy about you. Grace and peace, friends.